Hello and welcome back. I'm Karen Sullivan of Soul Symbols, and this is our Friday contemplation. On Mondays, I look at the wider sky, the broad view and the larger pattern, and that archetypal web moving through our collective field. And on Fridays, I come down to the ground, into our lived reality and that felt texture of a pattern. So we will be moving on Fridays into deeper explorations of not only what it means in the sky, but in our bodies, choices, relationships, and in the deeper architecture of life. So get your headphones, put your feet up, and enjoy this reflection with me. I've got an image in my mind that's been staying with me for the whole of the week, probably more than a few weeks, as I've been preparing my work for the new moon in Cancer. But it's the image of descent, of going down. So I'm not talking about falling or failing. I'm talking about going beneath the surface of things into a place where the usual light doesn't reach us as easily. And I was remembering the times in life that I found myself there, and many of us find ourselves there. So it's that time when we might have been moving along in a familiar way and living inside the rhythm of our days, holding together the story of who we are and where we think we're going. Then something changes. Sometimes it's an event or it's a feeling that's been gathering quietly for a long time. It can be as our bodies begin to speak, the things that we can't put into words. It can be grief arriving or the world itself beginning to feel harder to inhabit. But whatever it is, there's a sudden feeling that the surface of life no longer feels sufficient. And we need a different language for that. And I think this is why descent has such a powerful place in myth, philosophy, astrology, and psychology. It's one of the oldest human images for the moment when we have to go beneath what we know. The ancient world understood that there were places in the soul that can't be reached by staying in the bright, public, orderly part of life. There's places where our minds can't lead us very far, and places where we have to listen differently. I've been thinking about all these things through the Thema Mundi and Porphyry's cave, through Persephone's descent into the underworld, through the inward journey towards dream, symbol, image and shadow. And all of these carry a slightly different version of the same question. It's what happens when soul enters matter. What happens when we're taken into an experience that we just didn't choose? Or when something we've pushed away begins to call us from beneath the surface? We all know that. But perhaps most urgently, what does it mean to remain present within a world that is so difficult to bear? The Thema Mundi gives us a beautiful, beautiful place to begin. And what it is a symbolic birth chart of the cosmos. It's an ancient Hellenistic astrological image through which the signs and planets are arranged into a living order. And we have Cancer rising, the Cancer on the ascendant in that chart. The moon is in her own sign of Cancer. And there really is something deeply moving about that. The world begins through the moon and through the nearest celestial body. It comes through the light that doesn't generate itself, but receives and reflects. So it moves through the tides and memories and dependency and change. It comes through our body. The moon represents the body. Through the fact that life enters this world needing to be held. We arrive here through relationship and through a body that's already bound to the earth. So we are born inside a family, an ancestry, a lineage, a place and a time. We're born into the conditions that have been forming long before we ever appear, even as a twinkle in our father's eye, as my father used to say. There's no abstract arrival. We come into the thickness of life. So into hunger and sleep and weather and touch, into that need for shelter. We're born into the rhythms of growth and decline and the mystery of being shaped by people who were themselves shaped by lives they didn't fully understand. So Cancer, as the rising sign of the cosmos, gives us that beautiful image of entry. The soul enters the world through the lunar gate, through matter, and through the changing, feeling, vulnerable world. Porphyry develops this image in his reading of the cave of the nymphs. The cave appears in Homer's Odyssey when Odysseus returns to Ithaca. It's a really strange place. It's full of water and stone, and there are nymphs there weaving purple garments inside the darkness of the cave. And Porphyry sees this cave as an image of the cosmos itself. It's the world of generation and the place where soul becomes life. So it's the place where form gathers around something invisible. And he associates Cancer with the gate through which the souls descend into generation, into matter. And for him, Capricorn, the opposing sign, becomes the gate of return and ascent. And I think the cave is an extraordinary image for incarnation. It's dark enough that we can't see everything at once. And it's made of stone, which gives it structure, endurance and depth. And it contains water, which moves and flows and changes shape. Inside that cave, the nymphs are weaving. And that's a really important detail for me, because it's saying that life is woven, as are our bodies, and history is woven around us. So we become who we are through an intricate mixture of things. What we're given, the things that we inherit, what we survive and what we love, but also what we lose and the things we learn to conceal, and then what we gradually dare to bring forward. And Porphyry's cave holds all of that. It's a place beneath the open sky where eyes have to adjust. And perhaps there are times when we find ourselves entering a cave, metaphorically, inwardly. So a place where our old maps don't work and that certainty that we once held begins to fade. Something's happening in us or around us that can't be answered in our old language. When this happens, it can be really frightening. There's a very human urge to get out of that cave very quickly, to find the answer, restore the familiar light and get back to the version of ourselves that felt more certain and coherent and definitely more in control. But that cave holds its own intelligence. It slows us down and brings us close to what is underfoot. That cave is drawing us to notice the shapes that are forming in the dark. And we can go to the myth of Persephone here, because her story begins in the meadow, in the light. She's young, gathering flowers, everything is open around her. So that scene is full of colour and movement and the ordinary beauty of life continuing. Then the narcissus flower appears. So they are unusual and almost impossibly beautiful. And Persephone reaches for it. And as she does, the earth opens. Hades, lord of the underworld, comes out from beneath the ground and takes her down. The violence of that moment needs to remain in the story. Persephone is not setting off on a chosen spiritual journey. She's not going to a silent retreat by choice. She's taken from the world she knows and brought into a realm she just doesn't understand. And we have many experiences in life that carry something of that feeling when the ground opens and that life we were living disappears beneath us. We can find ourselves in grief, illness, financial uncertainty, separation. We can find ourselves in fear, exhaustion, and a loss of meaning. And that loss of meaning is a collective loss of meaning. It's a crisis of meaning for us. We might be living in the aftermath of something that's changed us, or facing a reality we'd rather not have chosen and we would never have chosen. So the descent begins before we've even got language to give it. The myth of Persephone gives dignity to that shock. And it doesn't ask for us, that myth, to turn it immediately into growth. It allows the terror of being separated from the familiar world. So it gives room for the confusion of finding ourselves in another country of the soul. And her mother, Demeter, doesn't simply accept the loss of her daughter. She searches and carries a grief that changes the world around her. The grain fails and the fields become barren. The whole earth feels the absence of what's been taken. There's something really profound here. Demeter's grief is personal, yet it's also larger than her individual pain. Her loss moves through the land and it affects the condition of life itself. Many of us are carrying forms of grief like this now. We've got grief for what's happening in the world, the suffering and the violence. We've got a grief for the earth, for the vulnerability of ordinary life. And that grief doesn't always arrive as tears. It can appear in our bodies as tiredness or numbness, or as a strange restlessness or an inability to settle, or with that sense that the world is asking more of us than we know how to give. And Demeter reminds us that that grief can be an expression of connection. We hurt because we're bound to life and because something in us recognizes what is at stake. And in the myth, Hecate appears. It's often associated with the triple goddess, the maiden, mother and crone. But Hecate appears in the myth when she hears Persephone cry out. And that's the role Hecate carries, the one who hears. She's the witness. She doesn't make the darkness disappear or undo what's happened. She carries a torch and moves towards the cry she hears from Persephone. And later she becomes Persephone's companion. And that's a beautiful part of the myth. There are times when we need someone who can sit beside us in the dark without trying to drag us out before we're ready. Someone who can hear what's beneath our words and can stay present when the experience doesn't have a neat shape. Perhaps we can also become more Hecate-like in our relationship with ourselves, to listen for the part of us that's been calling quietly. And our bodies often know before our minds catch up. And equally, our dreams can know before the mind does. So that image that keeps returning, it's the psyche that has its own language, and it speaks through symbol, image and story. It speaks through strange dreams that stay with us after we wake. It can speak through an animal at the edge of a forest or a child who's lost, through water rising, a path that disappears into the earth, an image of an old house with a locked room. Sometimes when we wake from a dream, we immediately ask, well, what does that mean? And that's kind of understandable. But there are images that need to remain with us for a time. They need time to work on us. We need to sit with them. James Hillman, in his book, The Dream and the Underworld, wrote about the importance of staying close to the image rather than rushing to explain it away. He understood that the underworld has its own language. And it's not English, people. So the dream isn't always trying to give us a set of instructions. Sometimes it's opening a door or placing us in the presence of something that's been waiting for us. And the idea of shadow becomes really important here, because the shadow is often described as the hidden or rejected part of ourselves, but it's a lot more tender and complicated than that. And it does contain pain, anger, shame, fear, envy, grief. And it might also contain the parts of us that had nowhere to go, or that anger that felt too dangerous. It can be that desire that didn't fit the role we were trying to play, or the creativity that we dismissed. It can also be instincts we ignored, and that voice that learned to be quiet. The shadow is often where life's been waiting, where the soul has placed something for safekeeping until we're ready to meet with it. And that meeting is rarely comfortable for any of us, because it's asking us to sit beside things that we might have been spending years avoiding. It asks us to acknowledge what has been true beneath the stories we've told about ourselves. Shadow asks us to become more honest. And we hear that phrase often, and it's become very popular, the dark night of the soul. And that comes from the Christian mystic, St. John of the Cross. And he was speaking about a really particular kind of spiritual passage. It's a time when the familiar lights of faith and certainty go out. So the old forms of consolation don't hold in the way that they once did. And why is it popular? Because it's an image that so many of us recognise. There are seasons in life when the old lights don't guide us and our futures feel obscured. There are also times when the certainty we were relying upon begins to fall away, and we find ourselves moving through a long stretch of unknowing. I'm not making an invitation here to romanticize suffering, not in any shape or form. Some forms of darkness need a lot of support, care, and real help. Yet there are periods when life asks us to move slowly because we can't see far ahead. We learn to take the next step by feeling for the ground in the dark. We learn to pay attention to smaller things. So to a conversation, a walk, the taste of food, the need for rest, a hand that we're holding, or a lit candle, the moon in the sky. These are the things that can begin to restore relationship with life. And perhaps that's where the image of treasures in darkness becomes meaningful. We speak of diamonds and crystals forming deep beneath the earth, and they form under immense pressure with particular conditions over long periods of time. The darkness isn't that treasure, nor is that pressure. The transformation lies in what happens when matter is held within the conditions that allow it to change. And I think this is closer to the human story too, and to the myths that talk of descent. Difficult experiences break us open, and they can also overwhelm us. What makes the difference is often the presence of care, of someone who can hear, the presence of time, and the presence of enough safety for something true to emerge. And the alchemists, and we talk again in modern New Age spirituality, people talk about alchemy a lot, inner alchemy. But the alchemists of old, the ancient alchemists, called one stage of transformation nigredo, the blackening. So that was the phase when the old material broke down. Within that phase, you have mortification. So it's the point when the familiar form couldn't remain as it was. And it was never presented as a pleasant stage. It was the dark work, the confusing work, the work of staying with the material that had become unstable. And we all know this feeling. That identity that we relied upon starts feeling way too tight, or our lives we've built don't hold the whole of us. It can be when a part of us is asking for more truth and room and depth, and we might not know what comes next. We may only know that the old way cannot continue unchanged. And that's often how descent begins. It begins with the recognition that something in us has gone underground and it's asking to be found. In a world that feels difficult to inhabit, this inward work becomes inseparable from the work of embodiment. To be embodied means that we remain in relationship with life and with our bodies and the earth. It means that we remain in relationship with what needs tending and with the people around us and the ordinary things that sustain us. That's radical, quietly radical, people, to keep caring for the body and allowing the grief to be felt, to make room for beauty and keep noticing what is alive and returning to the rhythms that remind us that life is more than the speed of 24 hours. Persephone returns from the underworld, though she returns completely changed. She's eaten the pomegranate, and that pomegranate means that you have to stay in the underworld. Part of her is belonging to the world beneath the earth now, so she knows something of darkness and separation and of the dead. She's carrying that knowledge back with her. So she becomes a figure who belongs to both worlds. And that's the image I want to leave you with. That we may not return from descent as the person we were before. There are experiences that change the complete texture of our life. And yet sometimes we come back carrying a deeper knowledge of what matters. We come back more able to recognise grief in others and to protect what's vulnerable. Ultimately, we become more able to hear our own soul when it speaks quietly. We're more able to live inside the body we've been given. So perhaps the question for this week is a really gentle one in this heaviness of dissent and nigredo and mortification. What is waiting beneath the surface for your attention? What part of your life has been asking to be heard? And can you meet it with enough patience to let it reveal itself in its own time? And that is what I have for you. Thank you for being here. And I'll be back on Monday with the broader picture of the sky. And until then, I invite you to be tender with yourselves. Be honest with what is surfacing and listen carefully for what is alive at depth. Have a restful weekend, and I will see you on the next one.